On this episode of the Voice of Reason podcast, join me as I sit down with Sal Cortez. Sal had an incredible career as not only a paramedic, but as an officer with the California Highway Patrol, working the streets, protecting governors, and most importantly, something that set him up for what he's doing nowadays, teaching tactical medicine and active shooter response to other law enforcement officers in our state. Sal and I share a powerful story of how our lives collided 34 years after a life-changing incident and how our stories came full circle. Sal Cortez, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great.
Thank you for making the drive out and meeting with us tonight, man. I'm so excited to have you on my show. And, for those of you who are tuning in and watching this podcast, my guest tonight has a very, very unique story. I think we both have a unique story that collided late last year. And so Sal is a former law enforcement officer with CHP, 26 years.
27?
27 years with the California Highway Patrol, a very decorated, very colorful career. I'll let you get into that here in a second. Former, it's still current, right? Paramedic? Former paramedic, still current, though, in the
medicine world.
In the medicine world, the tactical medicine world.
I like to say I'm kind of a paramedic teacher, but not so much a practitioner.
Yeah, you still know what you're doing. You're still very current. So, I'll let you kind of, carry on with the introduction of yourself and just tell us about yourself.
Well, first off, thank you, Rob, for inviting me onto your podcast this evening. I was excited to be here, and it was absolutely worth the drive. So thank you again for having me. So I have a kind of a hybrid career that spans across 40 years. That includes a number of years before getting into law enforcement as a ambulance paramedic here in the Stockton area, primarily in Stockton. And then in 1989, joined the California Highway Patrol and entered the academy in February of 89. And then was fortunate enough to be able to combine both my paramedic skills and my law enforcement career together to give me a lot of great assignments where probably most people, if you ask them what a highway patrolman does, they tell you, they give out speeding tickets and they arrest drunk drivers, etc. Certainly they do that, and it's as far as I'm concerned, it's probably one of the toughest jobs out there. Anytime you are working patrol, there's any possibilities can occur. I was fortunate enough to spend a couple of years, my first 2 years in the Redwood City area, working on patrol during what turned out to be a very hectic time. I got there in August, and as soon as I got out of break-in, the Loma Prieta earthquake occurred. Yeah. And so my first major incident occurred then, and so I was spread out across the Bay Area in Oakland, and remember spending some time at the Cypress structure, and then at the same time ended up in San Francisco in the Marina District, and then of course Redwood City had its own particular problems, but it seemed like I was transitioning into something different. And then 2 years later, I found myself fortunate enough to be selected to be on one of our helicopter units in Sacramento as a flight officer paramedic. And so I did that for 8 years, and it was a helicopter that was kind of multitasked, right. Regional helicopter. And so it was a law enforcement helicopter. It was also a advanced life support helicopter, and we did a lot of search and rescue. And so I did that for 8 years, and then ultimately ended up spending another year or two at our academy as an instructor in our emergency medical services unit, and working as a paramedic and an instructor there. And then made my way onto the Governor's Protective Detail in Sacramento, and did that for 3 years, working as both a security personnel traveling with two different governors, and then also acting as the governor and First Family's paramedic when they're out and about. Ultimately went back to the road and ended up in Stockton.
Which governors did you work for?
I worked for 2 years for Governor Davis, and 1 year for Governor Schwarzenegger.
The Terminator. That's why I asked you that.
Yeah. No, and there are a lot of separate stories that go along with either one of those two. But I learned that politics has a lot to do with how you work someone in a security role, and so that was really interesting. But ultimately, I ended up back in Stockton working for about 8 years on patrol. I felt this urge to get back there. And although I still maintained my paramedic license, I was involved in a number of different. I was what they considered a tactical paramedic, and so I did a lot of special assignments with different special groups within the Highway Patrol.
Right.
We deployed to different parts of the state for specific things and
presidential visits and all that.
Well, I mean, anytime there was a major. Like a riot or something.
Civil unrest.
Then they wanted a paramedic with the group, and so I would go to work as our team paramedic and then be part of the security force, but had kind of like being a corpsman in the military.
Right.
But ultimately, I ended up promoting, and once I promoted to sergeant, I spent a little while on the road, and then eventually ended up at our academy where I took over as our Academy Emergency Medical Services Sergeant and kind of oversaw a lot of the Academy instruction in those areas, and as well as managed all of the programs for the state that had to do with EMT and paramedic type stuff for the department. And I was there actually, which is kind of why I'm at today, where I originally developed this concept of tactical medicine right around 2010. Even though I'd always had some flavor for it, I knew that the Highway Patrol needed to take the next step into that. And so me and two of the officers that were working with me created a tactical medicine program there at our academy, and then created a program for cadets that were in the academy at that time, and then we started pouring it out to the field areas.
And that's huge because, the Highway Patrol, that's our state police, right? You guys absorbed the California State Police years ago.
Yeah.
You are our state agency, and, having worked in law enforcement myself for almost 20 years, a lot of the things that we adopted in our departments, we adopted from the Highway Patrol. A lot of the tactics, a lot of the, like you said, the tactical medicine, things you guys were teaching at the academy, it really rolled out into the smaller agencies and even the larger agencies in California. So that's a big deal. So I thank you for the work that you put in, man.
It was a natural progression. It seemed logical to me. It's not as if it had come to me and in a whim. I could see it occur from my career both in law enforcement and as an ambulance paramedic. Yeah. Again, you and I share an experience. So, we've both been at an active shooter event in different capacities, and then I've been to a second one in a more of a law enforcement capacity. And so this progression to where I am today and where the tactical medicine has gone is not something that I just thought up of.
Yeah.
It has come naturally.
1989, that was a big year for both of us.
It was.
A lot of things happened that year. You talked about the earthquake. You talked about going into law enforcement that year. Yeah. My life was changed in 1989, as you know, as was yours. And, for our listeners that don't know my story, I as a first grade child, I went to school one day. I attended Cleveland Elementary School in Stockton, California. I was in first grade, and that morning, a gunman walked onto our campus with an AK-47 and opened fire. And he ended up shooting 29 students, killed 5, shot a teacher, and I ended up being one of the 29. And I still have a bullet in my chest to this day. It really changed my life in the fact of I realized how fragile life was, and people always ask, well, you went into law enforcement, at the age of 21. Did the shooting, having survived that, is that why you went in? It was a big part of why I went in. It wasn't the actual reason, but it definitely helped push me in wanting to become a police officer. And so, I went into that career, and, I always paid attention to the active shooter trainings that our agencies were putting on. I always, anytime we had those type of trainings, my eyes were open, my ears were open, my mouth was shut, and I was soaking it all in, because I was like, wow, this is how I'm going to end up giving back, I became an active shooter response instructor for the agency that I was working for at the time, and was able to put on some pretty big active shooter trainings in my home county. And this last year, working as a sergeant for the school district police, my chief came up and said, hey, we're going to send you to this training. And I was excited, because it was the first training I'd been to in several years where I wasn't a proctor or an instructor. I got to just be a student, and it just so happened to be Mr. Cortez here putting on that class.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to talk about that day and kind of how?
Absolutely. So let me go back to 1989.
Yeah.
And that day, and I can only tell you that it was literally the last month of my ambulance career. The very next month, I was slated to go into the CHP Academy, and I had the interesting thing is that I had a choice to make in January, because I had also tested for the Stockton Fire Department, and had taken my last chief's oral on a Friday, and then the next Wednesday I took my last interview with my background investigators in Rancho Cordova with the Highway Patrol, and quite honestly, I would say it was a combination of things, but I was really burned out by EMS. And when you work in Stockton, it's either a man down or,
There's always work to do. It's always crazy.
There's a baby being delivered, or someone overdosed, or, it was one thing after the other. And it was a different era of ambulance EMS at that time. And so we would work 72 hours at a stretch. And so, it was just really difficult. But that day in 1989, on that January, we got this call for a man with a gun at Cleveland Elementary, and to me, quite honestly, it could have been a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday, any other day of the week. A man with a gun is.
It was a Tuesday.
Yeah, and so incidentally, it was a Tuesday, and so to me, it was just another call to go to. But when I got there, it quickly was different. The moment we got there, just by looking at the magnitude of the scene and what was going on, and there was such a tremendous response between both fire, ambulance, and police. And what a lot of people don't realize today is that in 1989, none of the processes that occur with an active shooter event were in place. In fact, the actual term active shooter
wasn't a term.
We went to a man with a gun.
Right.
And so that meant that there was no protocol for active shooter events. There was no such thing as a school lockdown. There was no such thing. The concept of incident command systems was just starting to get started. The concept of triage was just starting to get started. There was a number of things. And so at some point when you get there, it was just basically a free-for-all. More importantly, there was no such thing as staging. So you had fire, ambulance, police all showing up on scene, and the shooter was still active. Yeah,
people, the term staging, there's some listeners may not understand what that term is. That's basically when, the cops come in and make the scene safe for EMS. So, and EMS
the first responder make it safer for the second responders.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
The first and a half responders.
Responders.
So,
yes.
But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The term active shooter did not exist in those days.
And so there's no formal way to triage people and that anyone could conceive. And so, we found ourselves treating people who didn't need to be treated. But at some point I was, searching out people, and really to make this long story short, I didn't know you were there, but I quite honestly didn't see you, except that I know there were a lot of kids that were brought up to the front of the school, and at some point I ended up going into the school because we could find blood trails leading to cabinets where kids were actually hiding in the cabinets, and then at some point I actually, and this is kind of a weird story that is not often talked about, is that when things seemed to be kind of code 4, as we say, and kind of calm down, I decided to go out on my own and look, because, hey, I'm a medic. No one's going to harm me. I'm like Switzerland. I'm the Red Cross. And so I walked across the school grounds to an area of portables that were across the playground.
How long had it been since the call went out on the radio to where you were on scene doing this?
Well, it seems like it was a short period of time, but I'd say it was probably somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But in either case, as I approached this one portable building and came around the corner, or was getting prepared to come around the corner, I heard a bullet, a single shot go off, and instead of doing the smart thing and turning around and hightailing back, I figured I'd come around and look and see if there was someone injured. When in fact it turned out to be the shooter, Patrick Purdy, laying on the ground, who had just shot himself, and was laying on the ground with the 9mm that he had shot himself with, laying on the ground with him. And he was seizing because he just shot himself in the head, and so he wasn't quite dead yet. But the mystery of that day, and the part that, I know I probably used one of my 9 lives that day, was that there was a gentleman that was standing over him, effectively wearing all black BDUs, and he had scraggly blonde hair and a couple days growth of beard, and he was holding the AK. And I didn't see any markings on him. I just saw he was wearing all black, and he said, "Don't touch him. That's the shooter." And so I looked at him, and I looked at Patrick, and I said, "Okay." And then I turned around and I left.
This guy looked like an operator type?
So today, initially I thought he must be an operator. When I went back to the front of the school and I let one of the Stockton police officers know that the shooter was down over by the portable, it was all a surprise to them. They said, "Where?" And I kind of pointed in that direction. They move over to that direction, and they get there, and Purdy's on the ground, and the gun, his handgun, is still there, and the long gun is also
rifle,
laying on the ground, and the mystery man in black is gone. And so somehow someone was there, and I happened to see them, and when they came back and talked with me, I said, I gave this brief description. I told them that I thought he was a SWAT guy, and I said that they didn't wear black. And he said, did he have a badge? Or I said I didn't see anything that I could recall. No Sam Brown, no holster, no gun in a holster, just holding the long gun, and that person never materialized. So wow. It was a weird day, and the only reason I bring it up is that was the type of uncontrolled chaos that was occurring in 1989 at an active shooter event.
Well, it wasn't a secured campus either. I tell the story, and I tell the story a lot, but I walked to school that morning, and I came up Stadium Drive and walked through it wasn't really a gate. It was just a pass-through. It was a cyclone fence with a pole and a pole, and there was no swinging gate. There was no locking gate. You just walk through, and it was just open to the public, and anybody can walk onto our campus. So who knows who that person was? There's some houses and stuff, around there. I'm wondering if maybe a guy, just one of the residents, ran onto campus. Who knows? But that's interesting. I know you've shared that with me before.
When you look at the whole thing, and you look at the investigative side of this, I think even from the law enforcement perspective, no one had handled an active shooter event. So, sure, this is a man with a gun on a school and what appears to be, a mass homicide event. But there were so many agencies involved, and
everybody
probably so much evidence that was just trampled over, and not a lot to collect. If you recall, there was a helicopter that landed on scene. Any available shelves were probably flown, blown off, and so as the helicopter landed, and so
blowing shell casings across the pit. Yeah,
and so it was it just is a different way to do things. And today, sadly, because really all it's said about what is going on today is that we've brought it down to more of a correcting science on how to manage one.
Yeah.
Which is important that we do that today, but sad that we've come to this point.
Yeah, it is. Not that we have it all right yet.
No. We're far. In fact, the mistakes continue.
And we're never going to be good enough.
Yeah.
We got to continue at this thing. So back to how we met.
Yeah. So I was just thinking about that.
How we collided. So my boss came to me probably a month before this class and says, "Hey, I just went and had lunch with the owner of a new company." She didn't really give me a lot of your background. She just said that you were a medic at the time, and that you responded to Cleveland School. And she said, I want to send you through the class. And I remember I asked her, I said, well, did you tell her who I was, or did you tell Sal who I was? And she says, no. And she kind of smirked. And I remember at first it kind of irritated me. Like, why wouldn't you tell them that, I work for you and, I was involved. Yeah. But I'm actually thinking back to the day where I attended your class, the look on your face was worth it. And I'm sorry to say that, but I remember sitting in the back of the class and you I think it was your first class, right? With TacMed Services. You guys had just launched as a company, and Sal was up at the front of the room and he's giving his intro and telling everybody who he was and his background and it's a room full of law enforcement. It's a law enforcement class. Yeah. And I'm sitting back there and he starts talking about his experiences, and he says, and in 1989 I responded to Cleveland Elementary School as a medic. And you told about your the story that you just shared, and then you said like a month later you were enrolled in the academy at the Highway Patrol, and then you pulled the classroom and you said, has anybody ever been involved in any type of active shooter? And a couple people raised their hands, and I think I was like the last to go, and I raised my hand and I mentioned the shooting that I got into in 2013 as an officer, and then I said, and I also responded to the same shooting that you just talked about, Sal. And I remember the look of kind of confusion on your face, because you were like looking at me like, you're like maybe 40, like, and you're like, you're not old enough, to have been there as a cop. And I said, no, as a student. And I just remember the look on your face. It kind of, to me, it looked like, kind of took your breath away there for a second.
Well, you caught me off guard for sure. And I actually thought it was a joke for a second. In fact, if you recall, I think I said to you, so does my face look familiar?
Yeah, you did say that.
And so, the notion that you had been there didn't actually really hit me until later, that I was driving home.
Yeah.
And I was actually talking, to someone, and I was relating that story. Because, it was my first class and super busy. There was a lot of things going on. But I realized I had just completed a circle.
Yeah.
With you. And
I felt the same way.
This person said to me, this is my girlfriend, she says, she starts crying. And I'm like, did I say something wrong? Did I offend you? And she says, no, do you not know what you just said? You said that you had in your class today a student who was at the same event with you as a victim.
Yeah.
And these many years later, you find yourself in a room where you're teaching not just a class, but you're teaching a class on how to respond to the event that you both had first met, technically. And he's now a student as a police officer in that class. And I had a chill.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I just had a chill just saying it. And so
it's emotional. I mean, you think about it like that, and I get emotional thinking about it.
Yeah.
You know, because I look at the story in itself and how powerful it is, and how, you know, our paths end up crossing 34 years later. You know?
And quite, I mean, here's the interesting thing, Rob, and I think you will agree with me. Anyone in law enforcement, I hopefully would agree with me. In order to do what we do, and I'll stretch this into my EMS career, because I've seen far more people, sadly, but truthfully, in pain and die while on an ambulance than I ever did wearing a badge, you know. But in order to continue to do what you do, you have to be able to process things in a way that allows you to step away from that trauma. And if you're saying you're compartmentalizing it, or you're just stowing it away and it's, you know, it's going to come back and haunt you, I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm just saying that in order to continue to do what you do, you just move forward. And so it was very easy for me to process that day, because again, I was working in Stockton, and more importantly, I had bigger and broader things that I needed to get prepared for a month later, but it seemed like less than 2 years later, I was landing in a helicopter at Lyndhurst High School in Olivehurst for yet another active shooter event at a school, and this time as a cop. And so, but you know, it's just like you just eventually just start processing these things out, you know, because you have to get up and do the work the next day. Yeah,
that brings up a pretty powerful topic, you know, and let's talk about that for a second. You know, we get a lot of, I'm sure I have a lot of listeners, you know, who are in law enforcement, a lot of my colleagues, and I'm sure after this one, a lot of your colleagues as well. You know, yeah, police officers and first responders, you know, they say, I think the national average of just normal civilians, you know, go through, I forget the exact number, it's like 2 or 3 critical incidents in their lifetime. And police officers go through like thousands, you know, in a 30-year span, right? Stabbings, shootings, car accidents, kids dying. You know, I've had kids literally take their last breath in my arms as I'm pumping on their chest. Mm-hmm. I've stayed with gunshot victims and people smashed up in cars and knelt beside them, and all I can do was tell them they're not alone. I've watched more people die and been to more autopsies than I can count. And it's, you know, people ask, you know, how do you deal with that? How do you suppress that? It just becomes part of you. And it's the way you look at it. And I don't know, I really never thought about it. Like, what is the science behind it and how do I get through this? I just do it. You know, I never really thought about it until now, but now getting older, you know, now I'm I was pushed into an early retirement in my career just recently. You know, there's things that have like come up recently, stuff that I've suppressed, you know, and it's important. Like, how do you deal with it?
Well, I think first off, let me just say that no two people are wired the same, and I think everyone would agree with that. And so how they deal with stress is probably something that is innate to them from their early childhood. The things that they see and the crises that they have endured through their early childhood and into their adolescence, and so their ability to process those types of things, you know, takes them into their adulthood and gives them a greater capacity to kind of see and absorb trauma, and then still continue to move forward in a meaningful way. And when I say meaningful, I mean that they're still able to function. In other words, they haven't developed any vices that are bad. They haven't developed any issues with drugs or alcohol. You know, I mean, that they don't have any issues that would prevent them from continuing on what they do. And so somehow I almost feel like to say, you know, ignorance is a bliss.
Yeah.
And so, although I still remember these things, believe me, across my career, I flew for 8 years on a helicopter, And I would say I probably gave up 3 of my 9 lives flying. Yeah. And I still today would be very antsy. If, like, I have friends who call and say, hey, why don't you come fly with us sometime? You know, you're always welcome to come and fly. And that'd be great. That sounds great. I don't want to do it. I've come too close to dying. Yeah. That I don't want to take a chance. And so, you know, you just get to a point where you start to realize your own mortality. Yeah. And so I think that's kind of what I just heard you say. Yeah. But when you're young, you have to, you know, you have a job to do. You have a sort of a sense of duty, a call to duty, and you do it.
You know, with me having gone through the shooting as a first grader, you know, I had a round go through my right foot and had another round enter my chest right after it hit the pavement as I'm laying on the ground, and still have that in my chest to this day. I came real close to dying. And, you know, I learned as a 6.5-year-old child that life is very, very fragile. But I'm thankful because it opened my eyes to that. But I did become jaded, and I didn't become paranoid. I knew that it wasn't the norm, right? You know? And I bring this up because, you know, we've had a couple of school shootings nationally. You know, in the last few weeks, we just had Nashville. We just had the one in Kentucky, you know, at the bank. We had Uvalde, you know, last year. Sure. That was a horrible incident. All of them were. And I've had a lot of people reach out and say, you know, how do I talk to my child? How do I talk to my kid about being prepared? How do I prepare them? How do I prepare as an adult, as a parent? And there's so many people out there that are just wondering, going, how do I do this? What do I do? And I tell them, you just got to be upfront. You have to, obviously, you don't want to scare your child, and every kid's different. You don't want, I'm not preaching paranoia, but I'm preaching readiness. Yeah. And you know how important that is because you've dedicated your life to being ready as a police officer, as a medic, and now as a business owner with TacMed services, teaching active shooter response. You want these officers to be ready, but how do we deal with it with the civilian world? How do we deal with it as dealing with our kids? And even this morning, I had one of my old supervisors from a grocery store that I worked at reached out to me, and she's like, you know, how do I talk to my 10-year-old about this? Yeah, and I say, just be honest. The odds of this happening to him, very slim, but you need to be ready. And I said, you know, I train my kids. I like to do pop quizzes in the car usually. You know, we'll be driving, we'll be on a trip, coming back from the beach or even from the grocery store. And, you know, we live kind of out in a rural area. We have a lot of orchards and stuff where we live. And middle of the night, you know, kids are in the truck and they're on their phones or they're joking around and they're, you know, horse playing or whatever while I'm driving, not paying attention. And I'll come to a stop and I go, okay, Dad just passed out, hit a pole, we crashed. You guys are fine, but I'm not breathing, I'm not conscious. What are you going to do? Yeah. And my kids are like, where are we? There's no street signs. We're out in the middle of orchards. It's 10 o'clock at night. Where are we? Okay. If you get on your phone, call 911, how are you going to get me help? And what are you going to do? What's important right now? You know, and I walk them through things that they can do. There's, you know, landmarks. You know, you can describe a house. You know, there's lights. There's telephone poles. Go up to the telephone pole. There are numbers on the telephone pole. Can you give the dispatch, you know, these numbers that they can track, you know? Sure. And so I'm getting them thinking. And it's not about being paranoid. It's just being prepared. Yeah. You know, I talked to another gentleman this last week, had lunch with him and his son. They drove up from L.A. to meet with me. And they heard my story, and their son and daughter went through a 4-hour lockdown at their school recently. It was a hoax. They thought it was a real active shooter. The parents thought it was a real active shooter. The kids were super freaked out. And, you know, their son has been very upset and scared to go to school. And they reached out to somebody who happened to know me and said, this is the person you need to call. And I was very humbled that I got in touch with them. And I was glad that I can help, you know, but I had this conversation with them. And I was just very upfront with the kid saying, again, the odds of this happening to you, son, is very, very slim to none. but let's talk about how to be prepared. You know, while you're at school, what conversation can you have with your kid or with your friends?
Yeah.
You know, if an intruder were to come through that gate or through this classroom door, what are you going to do? You know, and get into that mindset, being mentally prepared, situational awareness of, okay, if A, B, and C happens, I'm going to do blank. Sure. You know, and it's so important.
Yeah.
You know,
it's come to it's a different realm of preparedness that we are having to expose our children to, and even adults, really. I mean, it comes across the spectrum of all citizens now, young and old alike. You know, the only thing that I had to compare to it as a kid is that we would have air raid sirens when I was in the second grade, and you know, we thought that we were going to be bombed, and so we'd crawl under our desks, and you know, but you get acclimated to that. Where I think that the resiliency of children is pretty significant, but there's always two components to it. To me, there's the strong teaching component with parents. And telling them the truth, but not making it sound like a doomsday event. No. And then a level of preparedness by the places that they go to, whether it be a school or church or business, what have you. You know, if you work in one of these places, because I think today more than ever, and you know, you asked me a few days ago, you know, what my voice of reason was. And I like to think that I'm not a psychologist. I'm not some expert in terrorism or active shooters. I don't know so much goes into the mind of these people per se exactly. I don't really understand as well as I could maybe, but what I do understand is that today, more than ever, all citizens need to gain a higher level of response than they've ever had. It's so much more important. Mm-hmm. And it goes beyond the actual response, because I'm sure you're familiar with this concept of left of bang.
Yeah.
So left of bang, you know, for your listeners, is a kind of a military phrase used to describe what things can be done before an event occurs. In this case, before that first shot gets cracked off, before the first bomb explodes, before the first traumatic event occurs. And so there's a lot of preparation that can be done. And today, more than ever, although it's not necessarily the lane in which I travel in, I completely understand, because let's take a look at the last several active shooter events. Every one of those shooters gave some indication that they were going to do what they were going to do. Of course. And so, again, for those who had knowledge of it, that's left of bang. Yeah. And so we have this opportunity to try to mitigate the potential for these types of threats, this carnage that will occur if no one says anything. Mm-hmm. Post-2001, the phrase, see something, do something, or see something, say something, was like the mantra post 9/11. Today, that mantra has to be reignited, refueled, because it's every person's responsibility to try to prevent something. And so, in the absence of that, even though, again, I think people are required and should have some understanding of it, there's a whole new industry of preparedness relative to left of bang. I think you and I have both attended, behavioral threat assessment courses.
I was just at one,
where we have this opportunity to see what's in the mind of these active shooters and how you can prevent that. You are a TLO, a terrorist liaison officer, and so that's part of your responsibility is to develop these SARs, and try to stop it before it happens. There are companies out there, and I'm sure you're familiar with them, that do this kind of stuff, that go to schools and do vulnerability assessments, mm-hmm. and talk to schools or agencies or businesses, and try to get them into a mindset of preparedness before it occurs. I'm affiliated with a company called Vigilant Global, and many of their director is actually a former terrorist director from the Threat Assessment Center, which you're familiar with as well. And so, Vigilant Global, they do everything that I don't do. And so including threat assessment, tabletop assessments, things to prepare schools, businesses, et cetera, to understand the vulnerabilities of their buildings.
So important.
And to make their students and their employees aware of the potential for these types of threats. And so I think, that before we even get into response has to be addressed today.
Of course.
We don't, the last thing I want for anyone to be is probably what you and I are.
Yeah.
Hypervigilant.
Yeah.
I used to think that was a compliment, but I realize now that that's another way of saying you're paranoid. But it's.
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, I think paranoia, is extreme, but I think the hypervigilance, yes, it's important, and it's something that I don't ever want to give up because I don't want to become complacent.
Sure.
And yeah, I don't think you'll ever see me putting my back towards a door in a diner.
That's correct. Believe me, you don't know how uncomfortable I feel with the door to my back right now.
I got you. Don't worry. There's a couple guns in here. So.
I got the window. You got the door.
Exactly.
I still,
Exactly.
I spent 3 years on the governor's protective detail. I went to the Secret Service Academy, did all my training through it, and all the things that we were taught. Ingress and egress, understanding your hard rooms, knowing exactly where to get in and out. And certainly every cop knows I need to find 2 ways out of this place.
Right.
So I always go, so do we need to teach people? Well, I think you actually do. Hey, listen, when you go into a restaurant, you're probably better off towards the back, but by the way, make sure that you can find a second way out.
Right.
Even if it means the kitchen, because there's probably a door.
Exactly. And that's the type of preparedness that I've been telling people that they need to have. And that's exactly that plays right into the advice that I gave even this morning, is always give yourself a way out. I tell these kids, it's not your job. I mean, obviously if you have the opportunity to stop a shooter or stop a bad guy, and that's a last resort. But it's your job, young man, to get home to your family. It's your job to just get home. And if that means running off campus, don't worry, you're not going to get in trouble. I told the 10-year-old that the other day. I said, if, God forbid, something were to happen on your campus, you need to get out, get out. If it's through a bathroom window, then it's through a bathroom window. If you got to jump down and even risk hurting yourself a little bit, but you know that you can get away, do it. And run to a safe place. And what does that safe place look like? Is it a house across the street? Is it hiding behind a car? Is it, waiting until the cops get there and, hiding in bushes? I mean, I don't know. It's going to look different, wherever you're at. But those are the things that I want you to start thinking about.
Yeah.
And you should have seen the freedom that this kid had. I could see it was almost a weight lifted. He was smiling, and as I'm talking, he's actually Googling the shooting that I was in, and he's looking. Oh, is that you? And but I was thankful, and I think it's important to say this. I tell my story. In fact, this podcast is birthed because of my story. Mm-hmm. The voice of reason. This was my voice of reason, and it's to be able to give back. And I continue telling my story not because I want any spotlight. Same thing with you. I'm sure it's not a spotlight. It's not a fame and glory thing for me. I tell the story because I think it inspires thought. And that's what I want to do. And that's the reason why I continue doing what I'm doing and why I travel and tell my story. It's not because I want any spotlight or any glam or anything like that. I want to inspire thought, and I want to inspire the desire to train more and prepare more. Because the last thing I want to happen is somebody gets into a situation and they say that you have really 3 responses, the fight, flight, or freeze. And I don't want somebody to freeze.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and unfortunately, I think that until we reach a level of competency in preparedness, and then response, those three options will still always be on the table. And, and quite honestly, I think in any event, even if you've exposed and trained 100 people, on the day of reckoning, you're going to get some heroes. They're going to come out of that 100, and you're going to get some people who will follow, and you'll get some who will freeze. And that's okay, because so long as you have some strong heroes and some good followers, that should be more than enough to deal with the crisis at hand. And it could be anything. You know, literally, people who freeze will still follow you. You just have to give them a little nudge.
Yeah, of course. You're going to have those leaders that are birthed out of an incident. Yeah, that's absolutely true. You know, so let's talk about your company. So how did TacMed Services come about, and what was the reasoning behind that? Obviously, I think we know, but how was that birthed?
Again, I didn't just step through the door, and because I'd been doing this for quite a while. And the interesting thing is that I think there should be a clear differentiation between when you talk about tactical medicine, because I think most people understand tactical medicine, they hang on the word medicine.
Yeah.
And so when in reality, tactical medicine in a mass casualty event, and I think you would agree, I'm positive you would agree, that in response, if you are a well-trained tactical medicine operator, that probably 70+% of your response are tactics. Mm-hmm. And so, unfortunately, so much of and so this leads to why I did what I did. So much of the training that has occurred with tactical medicine has always been more toward the medicine side. So they flipped it, 70, maybe 80%, and then some portion thereafter was dealt with proper extraction or concealment and cover type stuff, but not how to address a threat.
Right.
Not how to understand what your responsibilities are when you are first on scene. Not how to handle your responsibilities if you are tasked with leading a group of EMS personnel as a rescue task force.
Yeah.
And so although these concepts were out there, we always relegated it to whom? Special operations, right. Tactical teams. So, this surround and call out, wait 30 minutes, let the tactical team get in there and we had plenty of people that were surrounding the building that had tactical medicine experience. So they were more than capable of handling someone, possibly capable of handling someone who was injured, but they had no capability of understanding what it took to both have the mindset, which is really what it comes down to, is mindset, and the commitment to actually go in to that building. And so
while shots are still being fired.
Because we know these events only last no more than 8 to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And the first on scene or first responder, law enforcement, are usually there within 2 or 3 minutes, which we've seen in the last 2 weeks.
On the best case scenario, I would say 2 to 4 minutes. Yeah.
So there's a very narrow window for us to do something about that. But tactical medicine over the last 15 to 20 years has been about learning about what? I'll quiz you, Rob. What's the most important thing in tactical medicine that you would learn about the medicine side? What do we need to do?
Stop the bleeding.
And what did you learn to use to stop the bleeding?
A tourniquet.
So everybody knows how to put on a tourniquet, but not everyone understands what it takes to form a contact team.
Right.
Not everyone understands the difference between slow and deliberate and fast and aggressive. But if you want to understand it, watch the video from Nashville.
Amazing.
Because as I watched, I said, that's what I teach.
Yeah.
Now, if you've gone to a tactical medicine course and you have not done any of that, I'm not saying you've been underserved. I'm just saying that the level of training hadn't risen yet.
What if you're a police officer, your responsibility wasn't met?
And when you're talking about multiple agencies arriving on scene, and I'm from agency A and you're from agency B, and a third person from agency C shows up, we don't even know each other. And so we have little or no understanding of what our capabilities are. But when everybody has been trained to a level of actual tactical medicine, active shooter response, then you know that medicine is only what we do when we have mitigated the threat.
Right.
You don't want to do the right thing, medicine, at the wrong time when there's still an active threat.
Yeah.
And that's why I started this class. I did not start it to teach medicine. I have a background in medicine, and to me, I tell everyone, don't worry about the medicine. It's simple, basic life support. An officer can do it.
Yeah.
It's that easy.
Yeah.
What we're going to teach you is
We're
stuff
not that
that's going to require a level of teamwork and commitment and mindset that you have to develop. You have to develop now.
Well, they say, when you know what hits the fan, you resort back to your lowest level of training, and I want my cops, our cops, their lowest level of training to be top notch.
Yeah.
And that's what I really appreciated your class, because there's not a lot of people, like I said, I went almost 20 years of my career, and I've been to a lot of active shooter classes, and there was only yours and maybe one other, and I've been to several, that really focused on that type of those tactics. The moving to the sound of gunfire and thinking towards the sound of gunfire, while staying safe and having to step over victims if need be, and even, kicking these victims off as they're grabbing at you, because we all know that's what happens,
Yeah. Which is, again, if you have, which led me to start a second course in civilian emergency response. Yeah. So now it's my objective in a separate course to teach civilians how to respond when they find themselves in. It includes not only just this run, hide, and fight concept,
right,
but also self-care, buddy care,
of course,
of their own, and even self-extraction. We talk about the X.
Yeah.
Don't
move off the X.
If I was injured or shot on the X, then why would I stay on the X? And so we try to hammer that into cops, and now we have to teach this to civilians.
We do. I've been part of a training consultant group, Modern Warrior Training Concepts, for several years, and in fact, one of my partners and co-owners of the company is one of your colleagues who's trained with you, Mr. Justin Love himself, and
gotta love that name.
Oh yeah,
gotta love
Officer Love. Yep. So it's my boy. Big shout out to him. And we've been training the civilian side for a long time. He teaches the law enforcement side as well at the academy. Kind of followed in your footsteps in a few ways. But those classes are an eye opener for our students.
Yeah.
And that's our biggest selling class. We've had 30, 40 students per class, and they come out of there and they're just like, wow, it's 8 hours full of, it's 4 hours stop the bleed, the medicine side, and 4 hours of real scenario based. Okay, take everything you've learned in the first 4 hours of this class, and now let's apply it in real life type scenarios. And we bring in some moulage and some bad guys and loud, gunshots and shooting blanks, and the type of training that we have to call law enforcement ahead of time, saying, hey, there's a training going on here. Don't show up and shoot us. But it's been pretty powerful. And, it every time I get emotional because I share my story to bring some relevancy. But I really appreciate the response that we've had. And I want to continue doing this, man, the rest of my life. As long as I have air in my lungs and can continue doing this, I'm going to do it because hopefully it'll save a life one day.
I think 10 years ago, what you guys teach, what I teach to civilians would have been almost shunned. 10 years ago, simply because it was one of those things where we didn't want to expose anyone to something that was so harsh, so realistic. We didn't want to use the words like die or bleed, or shooter. You can still find that sentiment in class. In fact, I've taught classes where like some people said, this is too much for me. Yeah. And so I get it. You're part of that percentage of 100 that are going to freeze. And so we will deal with you as best we can, but we've got a job.
Yeah, you're not a bad person because of it.
No, and so you are. But 10 years ago, you would have had a greater percentage, being in that group, and maybe less who were willing to fight and follow and to that fight. And so so things have changed, and that's good. And it's also changed for law enforcement. And so, when I developed my active shooter terrorist response course, I wanted to let and hope that have cops understand one simple thing. You have a responsibility.
Yeah.
I mean, and quite honestly, if we looked at the events of this past week with Louisville, here we have a young officer 2 weeks out of an academy who, probably with an FTO, doing what he's supposed to do, what he's been taught to do, and maybe had never actually had any formal active shooter type training, but understood that there was a commitment that he was required to do, and so I think officers need to understand that the best way to stay tactically prepared and to prevent yourself from possibly getting injured is to be tactically prepared, is to understand, to have that warrior mindset, to understand that you're going into you have a job to do, and I'll just say it because the kind way to say it is to neutralize the suspect, but really you're ultimately going in there to kill somebody.
Of course,
you're going to go and kill a suspect, and because that's what they're doing. So and so this young man, thank God he's alive, and I hope he recovers.
Me too.
I think about him because he and I have had a similar path to law enforcement. He was an EMT for several years before he was decided to become a police officer, and he was a firefighter. So he could have stayed there,
like a volunteer firefighter, right?
And he could have pursued that.
Yeah.
But I think his decision to get into law enforcement was probably very much like mine. You get the calling becomes different, and for all my firefighter friends, I'm not saying one is better than the other, but the calling is different, and whether it's greater or more heroic or more dangerous, it doesn't really matter. It's just different. And so when you see someone like that 2 weeks out of an academy running toward the threat, how could you, as an officer who's working on patrol for a dozen plus years, say you don't want to learn to be able to respond like that? And it's the fear of not knowing that prevents you from actively wanting to do it.
Yeah, we are 911.
Yeah,
that is who we are, and it is our job. I ran our field training program at my last agency, and the officers would come right out of the academy or even from other agencies, and they'd report to me, and I'd have them for a couple weeks. And the first conversation that I would have, I'd take them in my unit, I'd drive over to Cleveland, I'd park, and I'd tell them my story. And a lot of them, their eyes would just get really big, and they'd have some questions. And I said, so have you ever asked yourself and had that talk with your spouse, if you're married, if that day comes and you get that call, are you going to be able to run towards that? Yeah. Knowing that you may not make it out. Hopefully you do. But you have to have it in your mind. There's a chance. I mean, no matter what, even outside of active shooters, we're not promised to make it home. None of us are. And but do you have what it takes to run towards that sound of gunfire and move towards that sound of gunfire and engage somebody or multiple people even, and be able to gauge to end that threat? Yeah. Have you done that mental checklist? And I would say it in roll call sometimes, getting my guys and gals out. We'd talk about it, show a video or something, and I'd look at them, and I'd ask that question. And I've actually told officers, and if you can't make that decision right now, or you doubt yourself, you should probably go home. And I was very serious about that, and I will never apologize for that, because maybe this job isn't for you.
Yeah.
Because that is your job. That is your job. When that call comes out that there are shots being fired and there's people getting shot, you are 911. We're not waiting for SWAT. No, you are going. And if you're first on scene, you're to develop a plan, and you're to barge in and, tactfully and engage that threat. hopefully you win, but it's our job. Even if it's taking bullets so other people can live, that's our job.
That is a prospect that not many people in law enforcement want to even think about.
Right.
Some would say they didn't sign up for that.
No, you did.
And I think that today there's more of a necessity for you to understand that. First off, I'm several years removed from active law enforcement, and having worked, a number of years in Stockton in two different capacities, if I had to go back today, knowing the environment that I'm in today, and not only just the criminality that is present today, but the perceptions. So the perceptions that exist about law enforcement are tremendous. And so, it becomes so important for anyone who puts on a badge and holsters a weapon to understand that the responsibilities are overwhelming. And, I like to say that, you will stand in front of death rather than swerve from, some potential threat.
It's true.
In the preservation of someone else's life. And so you just have to develop that mindset. And I'm not saying that officers don't have that mindset. What they don't have right now are the tools to develop that mindset. And so when we're talking about, active shooter response, it is up to guys like myself to help officers understand that they have the capability and that they have the tools to actually respond properly without hesitation, understanding that there's still a potential for injury.
Yeah.
And that's what's important. And so that's why I do what I do. I could stay happily retired. I mean, quite honestly, I'm okay. I see my friends who are retired and they're out having fun and doing things that they enjoy doing, but I actually enjoy doing this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard. It's hard, but,
you
but I enjoy doing it.
You are living your calling, my friend.
I never realized it was my calling until I started doing it. And when I retired, I took 2 years off. And I did the thing that people do after retiring. I traveled and hung out with the grandkids a lot and saw my friends. And of course, a lot of my friends were still working, but it wasn't. So I ended up getting a job as a deputy sheriff up in Placer County. And a guy called me, a friend of mine said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'm like, "What do you mean? What am I doing? I'm doing nothing and enjoying it." And slowly but surely, he says, "Well, I work here in the training division here at Placer County, and want to see if you're interested in a job." And I said, "Well, listen, these are my conditions for wanting to work there. I don't want to wear a uniform. I want a badge and a gun, and I don't want to stand in front of a magnetometer." And he said, "Perfect. We got a perfect job for you." I said, "What is it?" He goes, "Well, we have a job in our training division, and they want to develop tactical medicine."
Come on.
And like, boom, I'm gone. I'm there. And for 5 years, from 2017 to 2022, that's what I did. And so I started a program for them. I did a number of different things. I was a weapons instructor. It was a great second chapter. But doing that and developing a program and getting more heavily involved in tactical medicine and us not even being at a point where we are today in terms of the sheer number. I mean, I don't know if a lot of people realize, but to date, there have been 146 active shooter events in the United States to date. And so, I mean, we're not even 6 months into the year. And so we have got to do something
146
about that.
This year?
This year.
Wow.
This year across the U.S. And so we've got to do something about that. I mean, again, I'm not in a position to try to figure out how to stop them left of bang. But there are a lot of experts and a lot of people out there. I mean, I'm not in the pure position to it. My lane is teaching officers and citizens how to respond when we're right.
Your training is some of the best training that I've been to, and I've been to some great courses, and I plan on staying current with you, and hopefully working with you in a little
absolutely.
bit. I'm looking forward to that, because it's up to all of us. I own a piece of this, you own a piece of this. It's all of our responsibility, and I'm going to continue dedicating my life. Just because I'm not pushing a patrol car anymore, I'm going to stay involved. I've flipped that switch in my head. I know that I'm going to stay involved because, again, like I said, you're living your calling. I'm living my calling too. Yeah. And what better way to give back? If these incidents are the devil, then this is how I kick the devil in his mouth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, good for you. And I every now and then I question myself, why am I still doing this? Or why did I do it at all? But then something terrible happens. I mean, we never even have an opportunity to process one event when another event occurs.
What you're doing is necessary.
And here's the other side of that, Rob, that I think a lot of people don't understand, that in today's law enforcement environment, there is such a tremendous amount of understaffing.
Oh, yeah, huge.
That goes on in law enforcement, that it is so difficult even to get people on the road, that to get them to training at all, meaningful training, because, again, I'm not that far removed, and I'm certain you'll understand, and every cop that's out there listening is probably shaking their head in agreement with me right now. There's more training than there's time to train.
Yeah.
There's more, we'll just say, training that doesn't seem so relevant, that is being forced on you.
Oh, huge.
Then there's time to do it in.
Right.
And so when you have something that's meaningful, then you have to be able to try to squeeze it in really quick. And so in the development of my course, I said, hey, I could turn this into a 2 or 3 day course, but how am I going to get officers who, when they can barely meet a minimum of staffing on any given day, to come to 2 or 3 days of training? How do I squeeze this into 1 day? Well, less talk and more work. And so,
it's fast paced.
Yeah,
it's go.
It's funny because I had a student in my class say, it's the first class I've ever been in where I never had a chance to look at my cell phone.
You don't.
And I said, well, why would you be looking at your cell phone? She goes, because I normally look at my cell phone through the course of a course that I might be taking. I said, I get what you're saying. I said, I guess that's like a rating now. How many cell phones rating did you get? Well, we got a 0. Well, that's a high score. No cell phones were brought out, and you were there. We have an hour of lecture, and then we put you to work. We teach you medicine, we teach you tactics, and then we send you to scenarios. And
it goes fast, though.
The day's done before you know it. But you never have an opportunity to stop, because we're trying to, through multi-repetition, teach you how to develop mindset.
Yeah.
And so, but you can...
You don't hear anybody complaining in those classes, though.
No.
Everybody's...
We didn't get any complaints, but I guess, maybe someone who had an important phone call probably might have been a little irritated.
No. Both classes that I attended, there were, and I won't say the agencies, but there were people that were there on their own dime,
Sure.
and good for them, that had worked the night before.
Yeah.
Got off that morning, came to your class, 8-hour class, and we're heading back to work.
Yeah, I know. I remember.
And I remember I had to oof. Yeah. Are you sure you're okay? And the one gentleman, the first class, he looked at me. He's like, "No, I'm awake." He goes, "I'm awake." He goes, "I won't be able to sleep right now." He's like, because he goes, his adrenaline was going pretty hard, But yeah, I mean, good for those folks. I cringe thinking that they were heading back to work. I mean, we've all had those long days.
But that goes to what I was just saying. It's too difficult to staff. It's hard to get people off for anything.
It's hard. And how do we combat that now? Dealing with brass, dealing with admin, trying to get them on board, and you got the bean counters and everything else, right? It's like pulling teeth. I came back to my last agency, and this is a school district police department. I'm not trying to throw them under the bus or anything like that, because they do things well. Other things they could do a lot better, just like any other agency. But one of the things that I told the chief that hired me, I said, hey, when I come back, I hold this certification. This is my passion. We're going to do some active shooter training, and I'm asking for your cooperation, chief, to let me be involved and help me get this done. And I want to get all of our agencies to come together and train, and not only train the response from law enforcement, but train the unified response between law enforcement, EMS, and then take it a step further and, test the hospital side of it in the county, going, okay, you have this many, critical, this many stable, where are they going, how are they getting there, and do we have enough resources to continue, providing for the rest of the county? Those are the type of trainings that I really enjoy doing. It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
And I get it. It's a lot of work. But in 7 years of me being a sergeant, we had 2.
Yeah.
It's not enough.
Yeah, the logistics of that is greater
huge.
than
and I'm not saying you have to put together trainings for you should, but again, just the one-day classes, we don't do enough. And even the roll call trainings. I mean, active shooter response could be trained in several different ways, whether it's just a discussion in a patrol car with your partner, or with your team. I'd run my guys sometimes out in the parking lots. Let's go down to the auditorium, or let's do this, and just run them through a quick little drill, because wake them up in the morning for one, but it's like, man, if it's going to be our team today, we're going to be ready.
Yeah, that's a good that you do that. It's unfortunately not especially if you work in an urban environment where the moment you get out of briefing, you're already stacked up on calls that you have to,
that's every agency,
10, 15 calls that calls for service that you've got to handle. And I mean, they've been prioritized. And so you're working a lot.
Yeah.
So, it is extremely difficult. And that's part of, and probably the biggest reason why I thought an 8-hour day, if they can give up an 8-hour day, then, they can get a lot. And when you talk about these multi-agency, multi-scenario type trainings, EMS, fire, law enforcement, all combined, that is a 3-ring circus that takes weeks and months in the preparation, and so it's very difficult to put together. And so that if you've gone to 2, then you've gone to your fair share.
Yeah, I mean, but again, it's not enough.
Yeah, no,
it's never going to be enough.
Someone said to me, why isn't your class PSP? And for those of you who don't know, PSP in cop lingo here in California stands for a Perishable Skills Program. And there are a number of perishable skills, PSPs within law enforcement that are mandated.
Yeah, defensive tactics, driving,
weapons, etc. Some of them are gotten a little crazy, are fulfilling more of a social requirement than anything else. But in this mode in which we're traveling, some form of active shooter response will become PSP. What does it take? It takes, I could say, an act of legislation, which it does. It literally, the California legislation has to say, yes, we've got to do it, because now we've got to figure out how do we pay for it.
Right.
How do we get the agencies to pay for it? How do we now take another 8 hours out of their officers' days and send them to training? And so will it ever come to fruition? Well, I'll say that current events will drive that. And to that, I would simply say this. Right now, there is legislation that's being, was introduced, Assembly Bill 856, that is now requiring statewide training of active shooter response to be handled and trained by, well, again, I'll leave out the particulars, but nonetheless, because I've been involved in a lot of different, one of my tasks at the CHP Academy was legislative analysis. And so if you author a bill today it has about 50 different hurdles it has to cross before it'll be signed.
I've introduced bills and stuff.
And
I get it.
And then it'll go through a number of different amendments. And so, nonetheless, the beauty of this is that the last version, amended version that I saw, which was just today, because I've been fortunate enough to be privy into this conversation simply because someone thinks that I should be involved in the knowledge of it. They cited Nashville in when you look at the bill, they literally are citing Nashville. And what they said was that Nashville PD, Metro PD, almost 100% of their rank and file had been involved in active shooter response training, and nearly 100%.
Wow.
And then they unfortunately they cited Uvalde. 20% had been involved. Now, they had a lot of people. They had a lot of multi-agency response, but they had 20% of that in total group that had actually gone to active shooter response training. And so, and you could see the difference.
Oh, night and day.
The complete difference in that. And so all I'm saying is that I think legislatively there is a move to make it maybe not a PSP, but certainly something that will be available for everyone. They're trying to figure out exactly where do we place these centers for training, because it's a big state of multiple agencies, and so, but really a lot of this stuff can be handled in-house by an agency if they wanted to. But
you're right. I mean, it's funding, and because it's, people don't realize, like we used to say when I was a hostage negotiator and stuff, every time SWAT was called out, it's like pulling the big red handle, right?
Yeah.
And there goes, there's 20 grand.
Yeah.
There's another 30 grand.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Getting it to be PSP means that there's funding that comes through that, and then calling it certain terms,
sure,
releases other fundings federally and everything else.
That's correct.
So, I hope to see more to come on that. Anything I can do, man, let me know. I have a lot of experience up in Sacramento. I've testified in several Senate committee hearings and stuff like that. So, man, I want to be involved in that, because that's huge.
Well, the wheels are in motion, and as with most bills that are introduced into the legislature, there's a lot of political wrangling that goes on, and so you just gotta kind of stay out of the fray from that standpoint, and it's just that you've got so many different assemblymen who want their part of the state represented,
right?
That where this is going to occur. The worst thing that could happen to this, and it would be a total tragedy, and would only speak to the level of incompetency sometimes that goes on in our state government, is that if this bill dies, in the in this environment in which we live in today, if this bill dies, if in the first month of the year we could have 3 mass casualty events all in a 2-week period, this bill dies, and again, 146 across the U.S. To date, and so so we'll hope for the best, and see where they come along with that. But I think irrespective of that, you have all these agencies and all these entities that are trying to push the bar a little bit each and every day to get this level of training to officers, to get them more competent, and to civilians. Because, again, I can't help but stress the fact that even before we get there, there's a potential for civilians to try to mitigate the threat. You're gonna see a day where civilians are they're going to be boasting about a civilian who not only took down a shooter, but neutralized him in a way that will.
And there's a whole nother podcast in that, because we could take that a whole.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm
whole
not
another couple hours, man. But I could talk about this on and on and on. And Sal, I appreciate you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Where can people find you?
So again, I am more than happy to answer any questions, discuss any of the work that I do with anyone. I can be reached from a number of different ways. You can contact me through my email address at tacmedservices@gmail.com, tacmedservices@gmail. And then I also have a website, tacmedservices.com. And then I also, again, have a number of 916 area code, 817-9944. And I'm more than happy to just have a conversation with anyone that would like to talk. And if you've got a program that you're starting and you're looking for some advice on how to move it forward, I'm more than happy to.
This isn't competition.
No, God, at this point, if this isn't done collaboratively,
right,
we're never going to get everyone trained.
And if you do visit his website, there's a picture of this Studley police sergeant on the front page. Handsome fella.
I'll tell you, when I was looking for my front page of my website, I was looking for something that was both dynamic and showed the type of aggression that was required and I looked through, quite a few pictures, Rob, and there you were.
I was humbled. I got a text message from Sal probably a week or two after I attended that first class, and he goes, "You might want to check out the website. We put you on the front page." So yeah, there's a big picture of me. So, but I say that jokingly, but I'm humbled. I'm honored, brother. If there's anything I can ever do for you, man, I stand behind you 100%, and I will always defend you. And not that you need it, but you're doing amazing work. And,
thank you. And let me just say right back at you that you have done a tremendous amount of work after a tremendously traumatic event in your life. And a lot of people would have taken another direction. There are many directions to take. You and I have been witness to people who take the wrong direction after, they pity themselves. Instead, you've empowered yourself. And so you should be proud of yourself. And I had an opportunity to listen to a couple of your other podcasts, and I'm like, man, I didn't know that about this guy. I was gonna, if I could have reached out to give you a hug on through that podcast, I would have. But congratulations on all that you're doing.
Thank you, sir.
And I think you're going to be a success.
Thank you, Sal. I appreciate you.
You're welcome.
And we'll leave it at that. I'm sure there's more to come, and we'll have you back. And I want to continue, this journey with you, and we'll bring you back for some updates, and just keep doing what you're doing, man.
Thank you.
All right, Sal. Where we at with that? If you like this episode, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. We have some exciting guests coming on the show and look forward to bringing you some more amazing content very soon. So stay tuned.